Welcome. This was such a fun episode for me to put together. I had the pleasure of sitting with three terrific people, and we had a fantastic discussion. The whole thing lasted almost 2 hours, and we were able to pare it down a little bit for broadcast. So I hope that you enjoy listening to it as much as I did putting it together. If you like the episode, please subscribe, click the like button. That really helps. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome to the Astro Guy podcast. I'm not an expert. I'm an amateur like you. I'm here to learn and here to teach. So let's enjoy the ride together. Carpe Noctem. Seize the night. In this episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Dennis Cassia, Richard Sanderson, and Phil Harrington, three amateurs who have each attended the Stellafane Convention an incredible 50 times. They shared their wealth of knowledge and experience with us, shedding light on the significance of this renowned gathering of amateur astronomers and telescope makers. On the panel, we have Dennis Cassia. Dennis is a retired fire chief and current fire instructor in Monroe, Connecticut. Dennis has been an active amateur astronomer for much of his life and has done a lot of astrophotography. He is a member of the Springfield Telescope Makers, the club that hosts and runs the Stellafane Convention. Dennis and his wife Kim run the beginners program at the convention. Also joining the discussion is Richard Sanderson. Richard is an astronomer with a lifelong commitment to astronomy education and popularization. He served as the curator of physical sciences at the Springfield Museum in Springfield, Massachusetts, for 2 decades before retiring in 2018. He now holds the title of adjunct curator at the museum. Richard is currently the president of the Springfield Stars Club and has written hundreds of articles on astronomy. Richard co-authored the book Illustrated Timeline of the Universe in 2006. In recognition of his contributions to astronomy education, an asteroid was named for him, asteroid 6893 Sanderson. Richard attended his 50th convention in 2022, and along with Phil Harrington, created the Facebook group Stellafane Memories. Last but not least, we have Phil Harrington rounding out the panel. Phil is an accomplished author, engineer, college professor, and amateur astronomer. He's been an active participant in astronomy since witnessing the mesmerizing Good Friday total lunar eclipse of April 12, 1968. He currently serves as an adjunct professor at Suffolk Community College in New York, teaching courses in stellar and planetary astronomy. Phil is a founding member of the Westport Astronomical Society and is involved in organizing the annual Astronomers' Conjunction in Northfield, Massachusetts. He is also a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. Phil has authored 9 books, including Touring the Universe Through Binoculars, Starware, and Starwatch. His most recent publication, Cosmic Challenge, was published by Cambridge University Press. In recognition for Phil's remarkable contributions to amateur astronomy over more than 5 decades, Phil was honored with the prestigious 2018 Walter Scott Houston Award at the Stellafane Convention. During the discussion, Dennis, Rich, and Phil shared valuable insights into their extensive experiences at Stellafane. They shared their favorite moments, notable changes in the convention over the years, and the strong sense of community that Stellafane fosters among its attendees. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Dennis, Richard, and Phil for doing this episode and sharing their incredible experiences. Their profound insights and expertise have undoubtedly enriched our understanding of this renowned gathering and the significance it holds for amateur astronomers worldwide. Once again, be sure to connect with Richard and Phil on the Stellafane Memories Facebook group, where they continue to celebrate the convention's legacy and foster a community for Stellafane enthusiasts. Enjoy the episode. So I want to welcome three very special guest to the Astro Guy podcast. And we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to me, and I know near and dear to them. We're going to talk about Stellafane and the Stellafane Convention. And, my personal involvement with Stellafane goes back to my first convention was 1981, which you guys were veterans by then. But I've been going up there for a long time, and it's been a big part of my life and a big part of my family's life as well. So how about we talk about how you first found out about Stellafane and what year you first attended? Let's start with Dennis.
All right. So I had a buddy. His name was Greg Assayan, and we were both amateur astronomers down in the White Plains area. And every year he would say, come on up to Stellafane with me. Of course, me being stubborn and thick, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. What is it? Well, it's a telescope makers convention. Yeah, So finally, after a couple of years, I finally said, okay, Greg, I'm going to go. Now, according to my records, that was 1971 or 72. So I technically consider my first 72 positively, but it could have been 71.
And how about you, Richard?
Well, back in the early 70s, I was working as a teenage planetarium lecturer at the Springfield Science Museum. And there was a bunch of teenagers like myself who were really into astronomy working at the museum at the time. And I'm not sure who found out, but one of them found out about this event in Springfield, Vermont. And it turned out the director, Frank Corcus, who had built the planetarium at the Springfield Science Museum, went every year. So he knew all about it and told us about this amazing event every year called Stellafane. And this was 1971, so I was 16 years old. And fortunately, I heard about Stellafane at that youthful age because it got me up there early in my life and allowed me to reach 50 Stellafanes last year. But that first Stellafane in 1971, it was the Russell Porter centennial year at Stellafane, and there was a lot of memorabilia and presentations about Russell Porter, and there was just something magical about it. It was just an amazing place. The telescopes, meeting these celebrities like Walter Scott Houston, and it just something resonated in me, and I said, I'm never gonna miss a Stellafane if I can help it. And that thread has continued through my life.
Very relatable. And how about you, Will?
Yeah, my first Stellafane, I beat these two guys, was 1969. And I was 13 years old at the time. In February of that year, I began my subscription to Sky and Telescope. And in the March issue, I remember distinctly, there was always a column in Sky and Tel back then called the Amateur Astronomers. And I always went to that almost immediately. That was just my interest. And it featured conventions coming up, most of which were nowhere near here, but one of which was up in Springfield, Vermont. And so I read about it, and I thought, that sounds really interesting. Well, I lived in Connecticut, Norwalk, Connecticut at the time, and we often vacationed either in New Hampshire or Maine, and now and then into Vermont also. So I convinced my unsuspecting parents to drag me and my younger brother up to Springfield, Vermont. We stayed in the Howard Johnson's, which is now Best Western or whatever it's evolved into. We stayed there, and my mom, because I was only 13, my mom drove me up there while my father and younger brother stayed back at the hotel. And we spent the afternoon up there, then came back up at night as well. And of course, back then you had the old camping field and you had the old parking lot, but you still had to make that really harrowing trip up to the summit. By harrowing, I mean there were no lights, and we didn't know that. And so we had to sort of feel our way up that trail and then feel our way back down the trail and try to find the car, all with no flashlights. So that was sort of an interesting experience. But that was my first exposure was the 1969 convention, the 35th convention, I believe it was.
My home club, where I grew up 3 blocks away from it, was the same club that Roger Tuthill was a member of. And Phil, I think that's actually where you and I first met, back in Cranford, probably 30 some odd years ago. But there were so many people there that were going up to Stellafane when I was just a little kid. And I remember reading about it and seeing it in Sky Telescope magazine. And when I was old enough to go, I went with, I don't know if you guys remember Irv Price, but Irv drove me and another friend of mine. We were both 14 or 15, I think, at the time. And he drove us up there, and it was amazing. But not very different from you guys. But I had read about it for years, and it was a lot of anticipation. So I know one of the big things, and I know certainly this resonates with Dennis and I, because we are friends, and we're both members of the Springfield telescope makers. But a big thing that I hear from people all the time about Stellafane is they come back not just for the telescopes or the sky or the speakers, but for the friends, because they make friends there, and it kind of becomes a yearly thing.
Absolutely. In fact, I just wrote an article on the STM's 100th anniversary, or birthday, if you will, that'll appear this summer in Astronomy magazine. And that's how I summed it up at the very end. I asked sort of a rhetorical question: why do we keep going back here? And is it because of the dark skies? Sure. Is it because of the telescopes? Sure. Is it because of the swap meet? Sure. Hearing talks and so forth. But the bottom line, really, the reason I like to go back, the people. My wife, whose first Stellafane was 1981, she refers to me as the mayor of Stellafane, because I always walk around and I say hello to everybody, and people say hello to me, and you kind of get to know people. It's like a big family reunion every year. You don't necessarily keep in touch with them during the year, although now with social media, that's, a little more likely that you can. But you see people that you maybe didn't see for a full year, or possibly even more than that, depending on circumstances. And that's really one of the main drivers, for me anyway, is getting to see people like Rich all the time, and Dennis obviously also, and you. And I mean, I could just list people from Hartford, from Providence, Rhode Island, from Albany, from all of Pennsylvania, all over the place. And it's just wonderful to see people. It's amazing how old you all look, but versus me. But it's just an amazing human experience. And that's really the key for Stellafane. And at the same time, understanding that you're walking in the shadow of giants. My virtual background over here showing the pink clubhouse. Think of all that has happened either inside or directly adjacent to that clubhouse since it was first constructed. It really is amazing. I always, every year I go, the last thing I do before I leave on that Sunday morning is to walk up to the pink clubhouse, because I find it a very spiritual event, because I think about how I've changed and how the world has changed since I first saw it in 1969. And yet it's the same. There's some consistency here where everything else is evolving, but there's consistency here. And again, part of that is the spirit of Russell Porter and Ingalls and the rest of them and Rich mentioned, you mentioned Roger Tuthill, Scotty Houston, and so forth. It's their spirit, I think, also that pulls me in every year as well.
Where I grew up is about 5 or 6 blocks away from where Al Ingalls lived. I know that Porter actually had referred to coming to visit Ingalls at the house. They would sit by the river and smoke cigars and listen to records on a phonograph player. So that's kind of cool you mentioned him. So let's go to Dennis next. I'm sorry.
Well, there's no question at all that the camaraderie is a major driving force at Stellafane. Where else can you go around the world where all these people are going to come to one location, and intrinsically they're there for the hobby? Now, they don't have to be a telescope maker. They might be an amateur astronomer or a photographer, but you automatically know that everybody there, they're there for that various reasons. And, Wayne, you just reminded me of something. My first Stellafane, in the old days, folks, we had to read books if we wanted to learn about telescopes. So there were a bunch of books that used to come out, and you would see names of people. And Wayne, you reminded me, the first Stellafane, I got to meet Ralph Dakin and Dr. Henry Paul and George Keane. These people were gods to me. And I actually got to meet them and shake hands with them. So, of course, Rich and Phil and a bunch of people that I love to see, every year. And also, what's really interesting I found is that even the guest speakers that come up, they have a different attitude. Now, Wayne, you brought the meteorite men up there. I'm friends on social media with Jeff Notkin and Steve Arnold to this day. In fact, I just talked to Jeff about a week ago on the phone. We talk once a year. That's what happens when you're at Stellafane, and that's what happens when you meet people who are the same cut of cloth as you are.
You hit the nail on the head there. Richard, your take on that?
Well, I think there's something magical about being around a bunch of people of different levels of experience, different ages, different backgrounds, but all sharing the same passion. And it's about passion. People that are passionate about astronomy and about telescope making are driven to visit places like Stellafane so that they can interact with others. And I've always said that amateur astronomy is as much about people as it is about stars and galaxies and eclipses and planets, because it's people's interaction with the universe. Astronomy is that interaction, and human beings are an essential part. And here we're going up to Stellafane every year to interact with both the universe and the people that love the universe and the people that build instruments to see the universe close up. And so it's been such a treasure to go up to Stellafane every year and meet people like Phil and Dennis and many others who I never would have become friends with if it weren't for Stellafane. And those friendships are such a precious part of my life. I just can't imagine not having Stellafane in my life. Not just the annual convention, but all the friendships and all the experiences and all the passion that I've gained, the inspiration from people who are making telescopes that I could never make and then never would try, but I love admiring them. I love talking to those folks. And you mentioned George Keane. This was one of the first books I ever bought at Johnson's bookstore in Springfield, Massachusetts, back when I was about 16 years old. And I go up to Stellafane and wow, George Keane, I've got his book at home. He's walking around with his cowboy hat with a feather sticking out of it, and presiding over the afternoon talks in the tent behind the pink clubhouse in those days, and getting to talk to people like Dennis DeChico and Scotty Houston, and so you were interacting with the luminaries in the field, which was an incentive to many people, but you were also making friends and maybe even helping beginners out, young people that are getting into the hobby. And we all started out being the novices, the walking around in wonder at all these celebrities and all these people that knew all about telescopes and astronomy. And in those days, when we were teenagers, and now the roles have changed, and we're kind of trying to usher the newer generations into astronomy and telescope making, and provide role models for these young people to enter into the hobby.
Something that's come out in the last few years, I really think since the pandemic hit, is amateur astronomy is growing again. And that's a terrific thing. I think people in the isolation, they were like, well, what am I going to do? And they've gone out, and the hobby, because of technology and everything else, obviously the hobby's changed. But I want to kind of touch on the people. And I know a lot of people I know, their year is based on Stellafane. So that's they count years based on Stellafane. Dennis, you're nodding your head. I know you know this. So when you go up there and you build this network of friends and people, how has that changed your experiences or affected your experiences in the hobby of astronomy and related pursuits, even going into the professional side of things? All right, let's start with Phil.
Well, gee, let's see. Obviously, being involved at Stellafane got me much more involved with the hobby of amateur astronomy, and getting to see, like Rich and Dennis have said, some of the notable names back then. I mean, for me, Rich mentioned George Keane, for instance, and such. For me, it was Walter Scott Houston. I mean, I idolized that man as a kid, right? 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. I idolized him because there he was. You know, it wasn't just a name on a piece of paper in a magazine I got every month, but and I was always into deep sky observing even back then, and to actually see the man and ultimately get to know him was really quite amazing. I'll tell one quick story about that. It's not really answering your question, but that's okay. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
Go ahead there. Go on a tangent.
Okay, good. You see right behind me over here. Let's see this right about where my finger is against the wall, the retaining wall over there. I was sitting there with a friend of mine. This had to be about 1974, because that was one of the clearest years I've ever been there. And we were sitting on that wall, I don't know, maybe 12 midnight, 1 a.m., I don't know, something like that. And we were just no telescopes, no binoculars, just looking up at the sky, amazed at what we could see. And I said to my friend, I said, you know, right over there, and I pointed up, I said, I think I could see M33, the Triangulum Galaxy. I think I could see it naked eye. And he says, you know what you're talking about, you know, you're seeing things, whatever. I said, no, I said, I can see it right over there. There's the apex of Triangulum, and I go over here, and it's it's over toward Almach over there in Andromeda. That's it, right? I'm definitely seeing it. No. Anyway, so we're going back and forth about this. And apparently we were loud enough, because all of a sudden, out of the darkness, because he was walking up into the clubhouse, comes Walter Scott Houston with the corncob pipe and the whole thing. And he obviously had to hurt us. And he said, "You boys see M33 up there? Yeah, it's right over there." He points to it, and then he walks away just like that. I was vindicated. Walter Scott Houston vindicated me. That was wonderful. That was really my first personal encounter with him, and it's something that obviously I remember to this day, even though it was 40 years ago. And so it's that sort of thing that pulls me deeper into astronomy, and it's really because of him singularly that I want to get into writing, and ultimately that evolved into where I am now with Astronomy Magazine, doing the Binocular Universe column every month. But he was really, and through no fault of his own or no help of his own, really, but he just inspired me to do that. So in that sense, yeah, that one encounter, which sort of started the whole thing, has kind of directed a good part of my life, even to this day.
And for a very long time, he did the shadowgram talk, which was the talk that was given while you were waiting for the sky to get dark enough so you could see the main speaker's slides. And I don't know how long or when he started doing it, but I know he did it right up until the early 90s when he passed away. And it was always one of my favorite parts of the entire weekend, was listening to him, because it wasn't it was almost never a really astronomy focused talk. It was there was astronomy in it, and observing and telescoping, but for the most part, it was about people. He talked about people and the connections people had with each other and what they could do with those connections. And so I totally relate to that. I think that's awesome. Dennis, how about you? How about your network of people and how that's affect your pursuit in the hobby?
Well, going back to when I was first started and was really, really, really involved in it, we're going back to like 1966, 67. And I think I was probably the only crazy guy in my whole town who had a big telescope and would go out in the middle of the night and get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to look at stuff in the sky. So I never knew anybody personally who did that. There wasn't a club close to my house. And again, we didn't have social media. So that was it. I only had my one friend, Greg. And then we went to Stellafane. Of course, when we went to Stellafane, that's when I met people. Talk about networking. The fact that I went to Stellafane when I did is when I got to meet with Roger Tuthill. And it was because of that meeting that I went to Africa on Tuthill's eclipse trip into the Sahara Desert. So very quick turnaround to networking with people, even though you only saw them once a year. So then again, that drove me more. Well, I got to go back now every year because I'm not going to interact with these people because we don't have any way of communicating.
Well, for me, I've always thought about Stellafane and the experience of going up there. It almost feels like recharging a battery. You know, when you go up to do something like that, and you know, it's all well and good to practice amateur astronomy from your own backyard and to read magazines and books and what have you. But it adds another dimension. When you do something like attend Stellafane every year, you become part of a community. In reality, it's a family. I mean, you become part of a family, and it's just it's so valuable. It's so rewarding. It's so inspiring to be embraced by that family. You're not looking at astronomy from afar, but you're part of it. You're embraced by it. And that's the feeling I get at Stellafane. It's like the year when Stellafane was canceled recently because of COVID. So we waited 2 years and then went back to Stellafane, and I felt like I was coming home from a long trip. I mean, Stellafane is my home. And in many ways it is, because it's something a thread that goes back to my childhood. It's a constant, like Phil said, a constant that's, you know, as the world changes and life changes and telescopes change, things in the sky happen, they come and go, but lots of Stellafane remains the same, the tradition, the pink clubhouse, you know, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. It just stays, you know, it stays the same every year, and it's worth its weight in gold.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which was what keeps bringing you back year after year. And I think in a way we've kind of answered that, but I'm assuming that for all of you, the most important part of it isn't really the sky or the speakers. It's more the friendships than anything. Is that correct?
I would say for me it is, absolutely, because especially with one or two people who we used to live close to each other. In fact, one fellow I used to work with, so I saw him every day for several years. And then through a various circumstances, I left the job and took another one. He moved away, and now he lives outside of Atlanta, whereas here I am on Long Island. And while we used to see each other, we became very, very good friends. In fact, I'm the one who dragged him up to Stellafane to begin with, back in the mid 80s. So I only see him now once a year. And I mean, we always just hug each other, you know, and because this has brought us together again. So, you know, and that's what the other guys were saying here also. It's the people that you go to see. Absolutely. It's guised in the form of the nighttime sky, the homemade telescopes, the talks, the swap area and so forth. But it's the people that I really go to see. And some people in particular, and then other people more in general.
Do you think that sums it up for you, Dennis and Richard?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
I guess what I would say is it's the people against the backdrop of the universe and against the backdrop of the wonderful history up there at Stellafane and the backdrop of the beautiful scenery. But it's primarily the people. But it's everything combined. It's a magical recipe, basically, which you can't replicate. If you remove any of those ingredients, it wouldn't be the same.
Can I just interject real quickly, talking again about the people? Rich has done something which I think nobody else has, to my knowledge, including me, and I always say I'm going to, and I never do. But he goes around photographing those individual people every year up there. And while I'm there taking pictures of telescopes, he's taking pictures of the people. And, you know, that I think that's a wonderful way of memorialize is not the right word, but to reflect on the true spirit of Stellafane. He's capturing it in those images. And I keep threatening I'm going to follow him around every year, taking the exact same picture he takes. I never do, because he's much faster than I am. But I think that's just a wonderful, wonderful way to capture every Stellafane convention, is to go around, just take pictures of people. You may not know them all, but it's just a nice thing to do.
And when you do that, when you get right up close to somebody's face, you can see the excitement in their eyes. Here's somebody that loves astronomy, and they're in an astronomical paradise, and you can see the excitement in their eyes that they're having the time of their life. And that's what I love to capture, the same excitement that I feel.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I know that there's people there that I know Dennis and I know some people like Melinda Callis, for example. Seeing her son coming up there as an infant, and now he's in his 20s, and but there's so many people like that you've seen kids grow up, and I think of people that I met when I was there my first year that I'm still friends with, and people that I met while I was there, people that don't even live in this country, or at the time didn't, but now they do. But that's a different story. But so one of the things that I want to touch on is, I know, Phil, you said your first convention was in the late 60s, and Dennis and Rich was the early 70s, and for me it was the 80s. But the convention has certainly changed a lot over the years. And I remember hearing stories about what things were like in the 70s and in the early 80s. I remember it was the vibe was a little different, and it was even though I think there was probably more people, it was a much more intimate gathering than it is now. So let's talk a little bit about that, how it's changed over the years. So Dennis, you want to start us off on that?
The campsite was at what we call Miller's Field, and that was a place where a farmer used to allow us to park there, and that was the field. And you accessed Stellafane not through Jordan Road like we do now, but there was a back road that you went up. And you want to talk about a very narrow road that you had to navigate up. That was one heck. Certainly wasn't maintained very well. Then you came up to the top of the hill. The only water that was there was in a tank in the back of the truck. And everybody was close in those days because Miller's Field was only 4 or 5 acres. So when you camped there, together. In fact, in the old days, we would sit around and we would wait for the notice that the camping permits were being issued. And in those days, you dropped everything, you ran to the post office, put in your $5, special delivery that day because they were limited. And first come, first serve. So that was a big difference. All those things were a big difference. And we were also closer to the Pink Clubhouse and the original Stellafane location. The difference now is we have a humongous area. Anybody can camp. There are no limits to the number of people. The only disadvantage is a lot of people tend to stay at Stellafane East and they don't go to Stellafane West. So there are significant differences, but in the old days, it was much smaller and much more compact.
Yeah, I echo what Dennis said. I mean, the layout of Stellafane, I mean, the addition of Stellafane East was a huge evolutionary spurt in the history of Stellafane that completely changed the complexion of the convention. And in the early days, fewer people went, but it was really condensed to the summit of Breezy Hill and the campground, basically the hayfield, Miller's Field. And there was a big tent behind the clubhouse. So while people were looking at telescopes along the slope in the front of the Pink Clubhouse, behind the clubhouse was a tent that had the food concession, and behind that an even bigger tent where talks were being held. And boy, I have some fond memories of amazing people and presentations that I saw under that tent. And of course, part of the charm of Stellafane was when it rains, you had about a 50% chance of having water dripping on you under that tent. But hey, that was part of the Stellafane experience. And you know, we gave it different names like Stella Rain or Stella Flood some of those years. But, you know, nobody would even dream of missing it, whether it's going to rain or shine. You still wanted to be up there. And so in those days, it was sort of more intimate, you know, smaller group. But the slope in front of the clubhouse at night, especially Saturday night, was just amazing. All those telescopes in that tiny area with the owners standing there and people milling around looking through them and waiting in line through some of the bigger ones, and climbing up ladders to reach the eyepiece, and just the noise of people, you know, having fun and you know, exclaiming when they look through an eyepiece and see the Whirlpool Galaxy or the Ring Nebula in those beautiful skies, you know, through a giant telescope. It was just it was a different type of feeling than it is now. Not better, not worse, just different. You know, I love the early Stellafane of the 70s, and I love Stellafane now. You know, it's such a beautiful property now with an expansive campground and multiple observing areas and permanent observatories. I mean, it's just beautiful. But that historic Stellafane, I mean, every time I go up there and I sit on the wall that Phil mentioned, it's just hard to believe that a 16-year-old version of me sat on that wall once, a lifetime ago. Again, it's the connections that Stellafane creates through your lifetime.
And how about you, Phil, about the way the convention's changed?
Yeah, sure. No, the first 4 years I went up, 1969 to 1972, I stayed off site. Okay, but starting in 1973, I camped. A friend of mine from high school drove up, and we in his Volkswagen Beetle, his father's Volkswagen Beetle, and we had a couple of tents and set them up and so forth in Miller's Field. Now, Miller's Field, of course, and you can still see it today as you walk the road from the summit down to Stellafane East. You know the road itself, the Apache Falling, goes down and then goes up again. Well, we camped that year in the gully, and I don't know why we did that, but we camped in the gully, and we discovered that topography makes a big difference when it comes to water in your tent. And it did rain one of those nights, and sure enough, you know, I discovered what that was all about. And then, of course, a few years later, still in the old camping field, we had Stella Flood. I think it was 1976, if I remember, or Stella Rain, whatever you want to call it. And it turned into Stella Mud very quickly because we had to help people with these big old behemoth rear-wheel drive cars, trying to get them out. And a friend of mine who subsequently became a professional astronomer was just covered with hay and mud and everything. I was trying to get somebody else's Plymouth satellite out of the gully. So that was interesting experiences there that we don't always have these days in Stellafane East. But like the other guys were saying, the closeness, the crowdedness of the old campground in some ways made it much more challenging, but at the same time also made it a little more personal, because the one thing that Stellafane East, for all its size and all these little nooks and crannies where people are camping these days, it is possible to miss people altogether the entire weekend, even though you know they're there, unless you have a cell phone number. And of course, the odds of you having a signal up there is not terribly good. But unless you somehow could bump into them, you're not going to see them necessarily. I was looking for a friend of mine last year, who I've known since high school, and he hasn't been up to Stellafane in quite a while, and we just missed each other entirely. So, you know, that's one. I don't know if I should use the word drawback, because, like Rich said, it's a different complexion to the convention these days. It's wonderful. Stellafane East, you couldn't have dreamt of that back in the 70s with just this huge open area. But it does make finding individual people a bit of a challenge also, if you're trying to do that.
So I want to kind of get into memorable experiences, and I'll share just a couple of real quick ones that I have. One of them was not during the convention. It was actually, I think it was 2002. Was it October or November 2002? It was the year we had the Leonid meteor storm. and I was up there. It was a regular club meeting that night, and we had was it Dan Barry? Was that the guy's name, Dennis, the astronaut? He was on Survivor a couple of years later, but he was a shuttle astronaut that lived, I think, in Connecticut or Massachusetts. And he asked us if he could come up there to watch the meteor shower, and he did, and we got to hang out with him and talk all night. He was really interesting, but that meteor shower was just incredible. One of the most unbelievable things I've ever experienced in my life. And I remember as it was getting light out, seeing meteors, looking through. I was with a friend of mine in his truck. I was with Slack, and looking through the sunroof in his truck as we're driving down to Dunkin' Donuts to get coffee. You could still see him as it was getting light out. It was just really amazing. And then, I think it was a month earlier, we had a fantastic aurora that was visible right up to the zenith. And obviously neither of those were during the convention. But how about you guys? A specific memorable experience.
Well, one of mine for experiences that happened during the convention was in 1973. It was my third convention. And on Saturday evening, of course, the main day of the convention's over, and we're all busy observing and photographing the heavens on Saturday evening. I think it was right after midnight. It was early Sunday morning, the wee hours of the morning. I was taking star trail pictures, trying to capture some Perseid meteors, and I reloading film. So I was sort of squatting down between the tents and cars and reloading film into my camera. And all of a sudden, I thought somebody turned their car headlights on me. I could see my shadow extending across the ground with this bright light illuminating everything around me. And I was a little irked that somebody would turn their lights on me while I'm loading film. And I stood up and I realized it wasn't a car headlight. I could see the shadows moving, and I could see the whole campground, and I could see the mountains illuminated in the distance. And I turned around, and in the north there was a bright light. It looked like somebody had launched a flare, this brilliant light descending toward the tree line and behind the trees. And people were like shouting and screaming and clapping, and people said, what was that? What was that? A rumor went around that somebody must have launched a flare or had a flare gun or something. It was so bright, but it turned out it was a fireball, an actual fireball, a piece of cosmic debris burning in the atmosphere in the northern sky. And it was Walter Scott Houston was one of the ones who observed it and filed a report on it. And the estimate was minus 16th magnitude. And the remarkable thing was, as the fireball moved, you could see the shadows moving on the ground. And it was just something I'll never forget. To this day, it's the brightest fireball I've ever seen in my life.
How about you, Phil?
I have two, actually, both of which involve auroras. Okay. The first was 1982. It was my wife's second year up there with me. And we decided it didn't take place at Stellafane directly. Okay. So I'll preface that because it took place Sunday night, but the Sunday night after the convention. And we decided to stay over a night or two more, but we didn't stay at the summit or Stellafane East or wherever. Instead, we went to Crown Point camping area up in Perkinsville, okay, which is that's where we used to always go. Anyway, so we're up there, and as we were driving back to the campground from having dinner down in town, I looked off in the north, and I could see a glow. And I remember saying to my wife, I said, they have light pollution up there? What is that? And then I realized the closest thing is White River Junction, and that's still a pretty good distance away. So I thought, that can't be right. And anyway, long story short, that glow evolved into the most spectacular display of the aurora I had ever seen and have ever seen. We had to go from the campground. Crown Point has all these tall trees. So we went to Crown Point Cemetery, which is directly adjacent to the current campground. There are no sizable trees there. And we just laid between the stones and just watched the entire sky. The sky took on a fluid sense that I've never seen before, with these waves just rippling through the sky. It was astonishing. I mean, I didn't try to take any pictures or do anything silly like that. I just looked at it. And, you know, the old saying, that's a Kodak moment. That's still a Kodak moment for me. That was just the most spectacular thing I've ever seen, we've ever seen in our lives. You look directly at the zenith, and here's the corona of the aurora coming down at you. You're looking right along the magnetic lines as it's coming toward you. It was astonishing. Like I said, I've never seen anything like that again. But to story number 2, later in the 80s, late 80s, maybe even the early 90s, I don't remember. A buddy of mine and I, the one who I mentioned has since moved to Atlanta, and we see each other once a year up at Stellafane. He and I were into photography. Okay. And of course, back then it was all film. So we happened to have our cameras loaded with Ektachrome 400 probably. And our aurora started up on, I think it was Saturday night, if I remember. And I don't remember the exact year. Richard, Dennis, you may recall it. But we immediately set out to take photographs. So we go up to the summit because we want to have a nice view of the Pink Clubhouse in the foreground, maybe, or the turret telescope, whatever. And we're taking all these pictures. And we thought, wow, we've done great. This is astonishing. We were just congratulating ourselves left and right, doing such a great job. Well, it was film. So, of course, you had to send it out for processing. We sent it out for processing. We both did the exact same thing. Now, we both knew how to photograph the aurora. We did the exact same thing. In our excitement, we focused the lens to infinity, but each of us, without knowing the other one had done this, stopped the lens down to f/22, and we didn't record a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was memorable also, and we still laugh about it today. But you never know. But that was at Stellafane, so that's another memorable experience for me there.
Well, speaking of the 1972 aurora that you mentioned, I saw that from the Stellafane campground as well, and I remember, you know, sitting out, and there were, you know, a bunch of people watching it in lawn chairs and just, you know, just quietly watching this beautiful display, a performance, a cosmic performance decorating the heavens. And, you know, little by little people went to bed, and, you know, eventually it must have been like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I figured most people were asleep, but boy, was I wrong. I'm watching the aurora, and it was sort of a greenish white color throughout most of it, but all of a sudden it turned brilliant red, ruby red, for like about 30 seconds. And that field erupted. It was like a rock concert. It was like when the Beatles came on the stage and the audience went crazy. That camping field just went crazy. I said, wow, everybody's up. They're up all night long watching this Northern Lights. I thought, you know, maybe a dozen people were still up at that hour, but everybody was up. And man, if they were asleep, and they weren't after that, I'll never forget that moment.
How about you, Dennis? You have a memorable convention moment for us?
I actually have 2. One goes way back to the second convention I believe I was at. I remember we were up at the Pink Clubhouse, and we were, again, sitting on the stone wall, and there was a gentleman next to me, and it was late now. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and I'm looking up, and I happened to ask him, you know, do you know where whatever M33 is? So he takes out his binoculars and he points it out to me, and I get to watch it, and I see it. And we spent the entire night until the morning glow came up. And this man, I wish I could remember his name, but he showed me almost every object I ever heard about, some of which I couldn't even find yet with my own telescope. And what sets this whole thing apart was, Wayne, you may remember this, he slept in a hearse. He had a coffin in the back of his hearse, and he climbs in there and he goes to sleep in the morning. And wow, you know, all kinds. The second thing, the second most memorable thing for me, it has nothing to do with astronomy, but we had astronaut Alan Bean as one of our guest speakers. And on Friday night, we had a special dinner to help pay for astronaut Bean. And of course, my wife, Kim, had to open her mouth and get involved with running it. So I got suckered into it. And turns out we ended up working so much that we never actually got to meet Alan Bean. And because of that, Gary Sislak, Slack as you call him, invited us to lunch. So we went down to Friendly's in Springfield, Vermont, and sat there with Alan Bean and had lunch in a Friendly's. And all he wanted to talk about was my job as being a firefighter. And all I wanted to talk about was his job as being an astronaut. So we ended up talking about dogs. The wives loved dogs, football, and life. And after it was over, we paid the check. And this waitress comes over and said, "You have any idea who that elderly gentleman is?" She goes, "No, but he seemed like a nice guy." "That's Alan Bean, the fourth man to walk on the moon." "Why didn't you say something?" "Why didn't you?" That, to me, that's the most memorable non-astronomical event.
And I remember I was there with my wife and kids. We were in the Friendlies. It's just dumb luck. We ended up and we were right at the next table. So that was a lot of fun. And if I remember, he wanted to talk about fishing more than anything. So Dennis, and I want to have you start with this, because one of the things that you've done at convention for many years now is you and your wife do the beginner talks for people who've never been there. So I want to talk about, as seasoned attendees, what advice would you give someone who's attending the Stellafane Convention for the first time? And we'll start with Dennis.
If you're coming for the first time, there are a couple of things you need to think about before you get up there. First, may I suggest you go on the website and read all of the rules, all the regulations, all of the times to arrive, etc., and so on, so that you don't have a problem with that. Second, realize that we do have camping, but we don't really have camping facilities. So you don't have a campsite that's got electrical hookups or water. You have a space on a mountaintop. There are two places you can get water. I don't know if I drink it or not. And there is a shower that may or may not be heated. But other than that, you don't have anything there. If you want to get food, you can buy it. So you really need to understand, if you're going to come and camp, you're going to camp. I'd also recommend you come and see our program Introduction to Stellafane, because we tell you where to go and what to do and where to get everything. But I think one of the big problems, Wayne, we have, because my wife Kim and I are at the gate, is that people try to sneak in early, and you don't sneak in early. And we've expanded the camping nights to Thursday night, so you can pay an extra $10. And if you really want to come Thursday, there are no activities Thursday, but if you want to come and set up your campsite, you may, but you can't get in prior to 4 o'clock. And every year we have 15 or 20 people that come. They come up at 3:45. Can we get in? No. And we turn you around. You can't wait online. We turn you around and send you down, because on that day we have the big campers coming up, and people don't realize they take up a lot of space. So we don't open until 4, because the barriers are not in place for cars until John Martin gets them in place, and that's usually 4 o'clock. So that's why you can't get in early. So just check those times and be ready to rough it up a little bit.
And how about you, Phil? What would you recommend to people attending for the first time?
I think what I always do, because it's almost like I attend Stellafane for the first time every time I go, and that is to once you get settled, whether or not you're camping or just going to be staying there for the day and then going off site at night for lodging, is you park wherever it is and you walk around. And Thursday is wonderful for that. You walk around and you just try to take in as much as you possibly can. Now, it is rugged terrain, as Dennis said. You want to get in your steps and so forth to go discover how lousy shape you're really in, and you didn't think you were. But because you will, I mean, I'm a runner and a cyclist, and I work up a real sweat just going up the hill to where I typically camp the other side of the McGregor Observatory. But you want to walk around, and it's then that you see other people setting up and so on, and just talk to them. Maybe give them a hand setting up their tent, and so forth. But just get to know people. That's all. And if you possibly can, also on Thursday, go up to the Pink Clubhouse, to the summit, and just walk around and consider where you are. You're on hallowed ground. And I think that even before, you really have to do a pretest. Even before you get there, is read the history of Stellafane on the website, which is just wonderfully detailed. Wonderfully detailed. Understand where you're going. It's not just a weekend up in Vermont looking at stars. That's not what if that's what you're looking for only, you're going to be really disappointed. But if you go up understanding where you are and appreciating where you are, you'll be back again, probably 50 times. Or 51 as it's going to be for us this year, God willing. But again, you have to, I said before, you have to understand the spirit of Stellafane. So read as much as you can before, and then just walk around, and it'll pull you in. As it has with us for 50 years.
How about you, Richard?
The heart and soul of Stellafane, of course, is the telescope makers competition, with ribbons awarded for homemade telescopes, and that's a tradition that's been going on since long before I started going. So some people, might be wary about going up there not having made a telescope. But one thing about amateur astronomers is that those with telescopes, the vast majority of them, are always more than willing to share the view through their eyepiece. You can hang out for a while, and as they go from object to object, they love having you look through their telescopes. You can bring a telescope, that's great, but if you don't have one, don't let that keep you from going. You don't need a telescope to have a good time at Stellafane. There's plenty of optics up there. So either bring one or don't bring one, but I wouldn't be concerned about going up there without one. I brought one some years, and most years I don't bring one because there's plenty of others to look through. And one thing that I would really recommend, maybe go to a Stellafane first before you do this, or maybe go to a couple, and then get a copy of this wonderful book by Burt Willard. It's a biography of Russell Porter, who's the founder of Stellafane back in the 1920s. And it gives you the whole early history of Stellafane, and it really adds a lot of color and a lot of meaning to the event to learn this early history. And as Phil said, you're walking in the footsteps of giants, and this book really drives that point home, because you're reading about, these. And it was a grassroots movement, which makes it so fascinating. People working at Jones and Lamson, it was a high-tech industry up in Springfield, Vermont. And out of that grew this amateur telescope making movement during the years before World War II. And it just continues to this day. And it just captured the imagination of the country. And it's just so fascinating to experience that. So, drive around Springfield, Vermont. Go to the Hartness House, the turret telescope down there, the former governor's mansion, who was one of Russell Porter's friends, James Hartness, governor of Vermont. And, there's a lot of interesting context that, allows you to appreciate Stellafane even more, but especially Burt Willard's book. I had been going to Stellafane for quite a few years before I read it. When I read that book, I mean, my love for Stellafane, as much as it was, increased even more after reading that background and becoming more intimate with the history of it.
And you're right about that. Bert's book is excellent. The insights in it. Porter was such an interesting man, and he did so much in his life, with trips to the Arctic and the work he did on the 200-inch telescope and his drawings. Just amazing stuff, and it really is an excellent read. But one of the things that you kind of touched on something, Richard, and I'm going to go to you first with this question, is in the 50 conventions or the 50 years that you've been up there, there's been advances and changes in telescope making in and amateur astronomy in itself. And a lot of it has come out right at Stellafane. It was where we first saw it. And I'm going to give one quick example. My very first convention, 1981, I had set up, I had a scope, a homemade scope that I made. It was a 6-inch f4 reflector. And I set up right next to Steve Dotson and that giant, looked like a clown cannon, but it was a 22-inch Dobsonian with a mirror actually made by John Dobson. And that day or that evening, when they were doing the optical judging, Al Nagler came over to me and said, try this eyepiece. He says, I have this company and this is a prototype. And it was a prototype of the Nagler Type 1. It was a 7mm eyepiece. And I was a 15-year-old kid and didn't really know enough about what I was looking at. And I was like, oh, I have this Kellner I really like. But I tried it and I was like, oh, wow. Well, that's really nice and clean and crisp. So that was my personal one was trying out a Nagler eyepiece before they were available to the public. So Richard, do you want to talk about some technologies or changes in telescopes and telescope making that came out from what you've seen there?
Well, having been to 50 Stellafanes now, and especially when I look back on my slides, it's it just jumps right out is of course the Dobsonian revolution, where when I first started going, I mean, if somebody had an 8 or a 12-inch telescope, I mean, that was a big telescope, 12-inch reflector, and then Roger Tuthill would come up with a 20-inch reflector, and and everybody be crowding around it, taking hundreds of pictures of this wonder. And now they're commonplace, thanks to John Dobson, who promoted the design of making a telescope, large telescopes, accessible to people that aren't skilled machinists. But in the early days, I mean, it was mostly equatorially mounted, smaller reflectors and some refractors. But there's been a number of revolutions. I mean, there's the Dobsonian revolution. I guess the early '80s, mid '80s, I guess. And before that, there was the Maksutov revolution in the 1950s and 60s, where at Stellafane, it was a focal point of people making Maksutov telescopes, which was a leap in technology for amateur astronomers to make a telescope that has a meniscus or a corrector plate as well as a mirror. And it was a more technical type of telescope, more difficult to manufacture, but amateurs were up for the task. And Stellafane saw some of the first Maksutov telescopes, and they actually had a club up there that I was a member of during the final few years of its existence in the 70s, called the Maksutov Club, that Alan McIntosh used to run. On Saturday afternoon, they'd have a meeting, and people making Maksutov telescopes would do presentations and show their instruments. And so there was that revolution that amateurs can do more than just common Newtonian telescopes. They can make complicated designs. And then the Dobsonian revolution enabled people like myself, who lacked the machining skills and the facilities to make fancy equatorially mounted telescopes, can make one out of plywood and sonotube and maybe buy a mirror and install it, or grind your own mirror. But it made telescope making more accessible to the average amateur astronomer. And then, of course, the digital revolution, and that's more of a revolution in imaging, where it's just incredible. You look back at books like the one by George Keane, and you see these beautiful pictures. At the time, they were remarkable, and now, I mean, you can hold your cell phone up to your eyepiece and get better pictures. The evolution of technology, I guess, has been the most vividly apparent thing from having gone to so many Stellafanes, is that evolution of technology and technology's application to astronomy and telescope making.
And how about you, Phil? I know you're pretty in tune with the marketplace as far as that's concerned. So,
Well, my first convention, 1969, again to mention Walter Scott Houston, he set up a solar observatory, okay, which projected an image of the sun onto the rear of a screen that you could see in this what looked like a shed. And I thought that was just an astonishing that he could set this up for a weekend, and you ended up with an image of the sun that had to be 20 inches in diameter on this rear projection screen. I thought, not that right there, okay, it's fairly basic technology, at least by today's standards, obviously, but still, that showed the ingenuity of the amateur telescope maker. And again, I was a 13-year-old kid, and my jaw just hit the ground seeing this sort of thing. I also remember Steve Dotson's scope. If I remember, it had mag wheel rims for the yeah. That was quite and a robin egg blue tube and so forth. Yeah, that was a very interesting color scheme. But I remember that distinct. I don't remember your 6-inch f4 right next to it, but I remember that thing because it's in my pictures, certainly. But Rich mentioned, he gave a very good capsule summary of the changes we've seen. How if you look at the pictures that we took back in the 1970s, everything was a German equatorial mount. Every now and then you get a yoke mount maybe, or something like that. But it was all German equatorial mounts. Now you take a look going into the 80s and the 90s, and all you saw were Dobbs all over the place. Okay, first the very basic Dobbs, such as Dobson himself would promote. Then the fancier ones that have the sort of a second generation based on Dave Kriege's obsession design and so forth. And they're becoming more and more prevalent as well. But you're also going kind of back to the future with the digital revolution that Rich mentioned, because now you have all this go-to stuff that not just on Dobsonians that can now go to whatever you want to do, but again, we're going back to equatorial mounts nowadays as well. And we're seeing more and more of them crop up on at the summit as well. So it's kind of interesting. You can see, for instance, that the 1960s was certainly the decade of the Newtonian reflector. And then you mentioned the Maksudovs also. 1958, John Gregory bought the first Gregory Maksudov up to Stellafane. And that was sort of the genesis for the more modern day Questar and the ETXs and so forth, was his basic design. The idea you could luminize part of the corrector plate to turn that into the secondary mirror. So we saw that fade, but we always go through these phases, or at least so it seems. And nowadays, though, I don't know, my opinion, you don't see any one specific trend. Like you used to see, everybody had this or everybody had that on display. Now you're seeing a mixture of things. Like it was, how many years ago they brought the two clones of the Clark refractor. Right? It was astonishing. Things like that you're seeing. So while, yeah, you are seeing a certain prevalence of some designs, but there's so many unique things being brought up to Stellafane now that you never know what you're going to get at the next convention. Nowadays, I'm more into the antique telescopes. I find those fascinating, maybe because I'm more of an antique myself now, so I can relate to it. But they're just astonishing, some of the things that people bring up there now that have been resurrected and so refurbished and so forth. So I just enjoy the heck out of every year because you never know what you're going to find up on the summit.
Dennis, do you have anything?
Well, Rich and Phil went through my list. I'm going to, and we all agree, by the way, on the same things. The only thing I'd like to mention is that was touched upon is the amazing changes in digital cameras and photography. In the old days, I did it with film, and you had to push the film and you had to gas the film, and we tried every trick to get more light to add up on that film. And now you have these beautiful CCD detectors, not only in dedicated cameras, but cell phones and whatever that can do this for you with the assistance of computers. And Wayne, you're a person that I've watched grow over the years, and you're doing amazing work these days with your telescope in your backyard with light pollution. And that's always shocking to me what you do. The one thing I do remember is someone mentioned Al Nagler. He brought up a photo multiplier, a next generation photo multiplier that you could connect to the eyepiece of your telescope. And he also made one that you didn't have to use a telescope. So we're in the field and he says, here, take this and look through it. There's no magnification. And I looked up, and for those of you who are astronomers, I saw the North American nebula with my eyes as if it was a photograph. So that's the last spectacular thing. But you guys all hit the nail on the head with all the new stuff. So I yield.
And thank you for your kind words, Dennis. I appreciate that, because I saw some of your early work and it was really impressive.
Thank you.
So one of the things I want to touch on now is, are there any past or any particular speakers, presentations, or anything that stood out as highlights from past conventions?
The favorite of mine was astronaut Alan Bean, not only because he walked on the moon, but his temperament and his attitude was wonderful. And he got up on that stage and people just kept quiet and listened to this man talk for 45 minutes, which seemed like 25 minutes. He's one spectacular. Again, I love the Meteorite Men because they did a great show up there. And another one that I have to mention quick, I don't want to steal ideas from other people, but I think I enjoyed Alan Stern, who was the lead scientist on the New Horizons Pluto mission. He was from NASA, and he came up. In fact, the second time he was there, it was raining, and he did a phenomenal program. And what I really enjoyed about these three speakers were they did a lot of focusing on the kids, on the younger people. Alan Stern especially, calling all the little kids up and giving them little prizes special and asking them what they wanted to do. And I think the three speakers I mentioned certainly went out of their way to mention the young people as well, so that they knew they had an out. In fact, at the end of Alan Bean's program, I think he had made some comment about that. Now, those were his final words.
How about you, Richard?
One, of course, as Dennis mentioned, meeting a human being that walked on another celestial object, I mean, just blew me away. I mean, I had met Alan Bean twice in my lifetime, and both times were just incredible. I mean, what a privilege to meet somebody from that select group of individuals that walked on the moon. I'll never forget that program at the Hartness House, and just having a chance to chat with them. And I'll never forget one thing he mentioned about during the trip to the moon, when they're sailing between the Earth and the moon and in the command module. And he said he looked at the window of the space capsule and thought to himself, on the other side of that piece of glass is instant death. I mean, the risk that they took in a pure vacuum traveling to the moon, and you know, those were the heroes of our age, in my opinion. And it was such a thrill to meet him. And also earlier than that, 1988, Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of Pluto. That was pretty exciting to meet him at Stellafane and hear him describe searching all the photographic plates for a moving point of light, and the excitement of realizing that he had found a new planet. Unbelievable. And one person that I really enjoyed meeting, I don't recall if he ever gave a talk, but in 1972, a man named Norman James, who died recently, a couple of years ago, brought one of the most remarkable telescopes I've ever seen, a sphere-mounted Newtonian, this futuristic design where it ran on a film of water. And he designed this telescope, and I took pictures of it, and I said, what an amazing instrument. And, I chatted with him up there, but then I never saw him again, never spoke to him again. But more recently, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I accidentally crossed paths with him on Facebook. And I sent him some pictures that I had taken of him back in 1972. I mean, that's and he was pretty excited about seeing them, and me still remembering that amazing telescope. And it turns out that he was one of the designers of the GM Firebird 3 automobile. He also helped design the lunar rover. I mean, it just shows you the caliber of people that you might bump into on Breezy Hill. And we became friends. And he sent me all pictures of other sphere-mounted telescopes and different designs and schematics and everything. And it was because I crossed paths with him at Stellafane, and then managed to reconnect with him later on. So again, I'm not sure if he might have spoken up there, but it was mainly chatting with him among the telescopes in front of the Pink Clubhouse.
And Phil, how about you? A memorable speaker?
Just to mention Norman James again, you're right. His spherical Newtonian was also the genesis for Edmund's astroscan, right? So they kind of grabbed that design and ran with that ball. But also the portable Newtonian from the 1990s, with Peter Smitka, I think the name was, the owner of the company. He also ran with that design as well. But in any case, now as far as speakers go, one that struck me, and this goes back now years, was Ben Mayer. He actually gave 2 Twilight talks up there, two keynote talks up there, separated by a couple of years. And both of those talks I found were very meaningful to me personally, because he had a gizmo back then called the Problicom. If you're, again, I'm dating myself by even talking about it, right? Problicom. But I remember, I think it may have been his second keynote talk. He became very emotional during the presentation because apparently his son had died in a car accident not long before that presentation. And that certainly reflected in his tone and so forth. And it was a very, very moving presentation that he gave both times, but especially I think it was the second time they talked about his son, the loss of his son. Another great speaker, you mentioned Clyde Tombaugh already, so I can't grab that one. I thought David Sobel just recently did a very good talk, but Rich and I have heard her several times, and she always does a tremendous presentation. David does. So I thought that was wonderful. And I must say, although I'm not high on the list, but I was honored to give the keynote talk at Stellafane back in 1996, I think it was. And that was the honor of my lifetime. I can't tell you what that meant to be standing in that, and it was nice and clear. And I gave a presentation called The Story of Stellafane. I traced the history of the place. And that was just so meaningful for me. Maybe it wasn't for the audience, but it was for me. Because again, I'm standing in the shadow of giants doing this. And that was just one of the most amazing experiences in my life. Just doing that. But so there've been lots of wonderful speakers there. I get 1996 was kind of a short year, but off year maybe. But I know this year Joe Rayo is going to do a phenomenal job because, like you said, Wayne, before, he's a storyteller, and that engages the audience. And so I'm looking forward to Joe's presentation this year, probably more than many past years. So I know he's going to do a wonderful job. And we can only hope it's going to be cloudy so we don't have to leave and look at the sky. So we can sit there and listen to Joe's entire presentation.
It's funny when there's a really good speaker and it is clear, you hear the oohs and ahs as something, a satellite or the ISS or a meteor goes over. But before I get to and I'm going to make this the last question, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and just tell you a real quick story. John Dobson's come up a lot in this. And I didn't find out about this until after John died. But my sister-in-law, my oldest brother's wife, and they've been married for over 40 years now, close to 45 years. She's John Dobson's first cousin. And her first name is Lowry, and John Dobson's middle name is Lowry. It's a family name, and never made the connection. Now, my brother and his wife worked for the State Department. They lived all over the world, but it didn't come out until after he had died. And she told me a story about in the 1960s visiting him in San Francisco and going for a walk, and her mother was there, and the whole thing. And I think they shared a set of grandparents. That was the connection. So I had that connection. I never knew about it. So getting into to sort of the end here, looking ahead, what do you envision that the future of Stellafane is going to be? You know, what kind of changes or developments do you think are going to happen in the coming years?
As far as new developments are concerned, I know that the club itself, Wayne, you know this as well, we're constantly working on upgrades to the facility. So now we have optical cables sending our webcams. So they're very stable now, and you can go on the website and go to the webcams and see Stellafane 24/7 if you wish. And we're also doing a lot of refurbishing of the buildings. The Pink Clubhouse has had some damage, so we made some improvements on the roof last year, and this year we're going to be replacing a rear window, and Ken and the boys have replaced a significant amount of the clapboard at the back. So my perspective is slightly different because I'm a member of the Springfield Telescope Makers, and so are you, Wayne. So I see things from the perspective of we do a phenomenal amount of work maintaining the buildings, especially the historical buildings. And one of the things that comes up when you want to replace a window is you're going to follow the construction techniques used from the time the building was built in the early 1920s. So, and we're not going to use vinyl windows because they didn't exist. So we're going to continue to have to paint it. So my perspective for the future of Stellafane, for me, is maintaining it and improving the infrastructure of it. As far as other things are concerned, I don't really think we're going to make it any bigger because honestly, I think we have enough room now for everybody to get there and be able to camp and whatnot. And I just see improvements in the infrastructure and the buildings.
For Phil and Richard, I want to change the question slightly. And I would just want to add in there, are there any changes or developments that you'd like to see at Stellafane in the coming years?
Well, one thing I really like about Stellafane is the fact that the folks at Stellafane like to honor the people that came before us, the people whose footsteps we're walking in, the luminaries from the past, Russell Porter and others who have either helped make Stellafane happen every year or who have visited Stellafane, and I like that, and hopefully that'll continue. I've always thought it'd be nice to have a Stellafane Hall of Fame or something, you know, where you honor people like Scotty Houston and Roger Tudhill and different folks from over the years who have made lasting contributions to amateur astronomy and to Stellafane itself. I think it's always going to be a place where people are going to see the cutting edge of amateur telescope making. That's where you would go to see new innovations and on display. And I think that will continue. And I think an important thing about Stellafane is the inspiration that it provides for young people. And there's been a huge effort to do even more of that in recent years with children's programs and children's telescope making categories for young people and junior awards and all that, to inspire the next generation of hobbyists in this field and to keep it alive. But one of the challenges, I think, is something that all astronomy organizations and especially clubs have to deal with, and that's societal evolution as it relates to the digital age and people's changing interests and values about things from the past. A lot of clubs have had their memberships diminish and even gone out of existence with competition from digital technology and just a sort of a lack of interest in the old ways of doing things as relating to astronomy clubs. But I think Stellafane is always going to attract a lot of people because it's not, I mean, it is being run by the Springfield telescope makers, but the event itself is such an amazing activity. And that's what I think people want is it's not just sitting at meetings and voting and Robert's Rules of Order and electing officers and different things. They want to do things. They want to interact with the heavens. They want activities, and that's what Stellafane's all about. So I think whereas other organizations and clubs will have challenges in the digital age, I think Stellafane will be pretty successful. They've come up with a good recipe, and obviously things have to evolve. But I'm pretty certain that Stellafane will live on for many, many more years. It'll certainly outlive me.
Bill, how would you like to see? What would you like to see happen in the future itself?
Expanding on Rich's idea, the program has become so much richer than it was when I first went there. When I first went there, you had evening talks on Friday, and you had 2 or 3, 4 super technical talks on Saturday afternoon. And then you had, the welcome by Governor Joseph Johnson, and you had Scotty Houston's shadowgram, and you had the awards and so on, and then you had the keynote speaker. And that was pretty much about it, right? Whereas now the program is just so encompassing. It's so much more welcoming than it was. That was the one thing that, I don't want to say it turned me off, but didn't really grab me back when I was a teenager into my early 20s, the technical nature of the presentations. Whereas now you have beginner level, intermediate level, advanced level, and you have programs for children, and you have the Observing Olympics, my personal favorite, the Binocular Observing Olympics, which I sent in the final list of them to Eileen Meyer this morning. But it's just wonderful to see it evolve to this, and I credit the folks at the STM for expanding their horizon tremendously with the program, and I think that's made Stellafane a much richer experience for those who go there, whether or not it's your first or your 51st. It's a much richer experience for us all because now we have so many options of things to do. Used to be, you sat around Saturday afternoon, and now what do? I don't know. Well, it's awfully hot. You didn't really have much. Now there's always something to do. Whether or not it's in the pavilion, whether or not it's in the library at the McGregor Observatory or some other venue, there's always something to do for everybody. And I think the STM really needs to be congratulated for that. And whether or not they'll expand it, I don't know, because I think right now it's almost to the point of exploding. But it's just right. But it's a wonderful, enriching experience the entire weekend, starting on Thursday, even though there's technically no program. But it's such a wonderfully enriching experience for everybody who goes. I think the club should be really congratulated for doing this. Good job.
Look at that. I mean, amateur astronomy as a whole owes the Springfield telescope makers a huge debt of gratitude for. We go up there and have a great weekend, but a lot of people don't appreciate the amount of work that goes into, maintaining a property that big and running such a huge event year after year. And so I'm sure it's a labor of love for folks like Dennis and others who go up there early and get everything ready and stay at the gate and make sure people are introduced properly and keep all the projectors running. And I echoes Phil's thank you to them. It's surely appreciated by thousands and thousands of people, and all I can say is to those folks that do it every year, you've changed a lot of lives and you've changed the world in a good way. What you're doing doesn't go unnoticed, and it's having a profound difference in the world.
I think it's certainly changed a lot of people's lives, and certainly had an impact on people's lives. I mean, I got married up there, so certainly had an impact on my life.
You know, you talk about the Springfield telescope makers, but we have two people with us today, Richard Sanderson and Phil Harrington, who do programs every single year. Phil, how many programs have you done at Stellafane?
Oh, I don't know. My first was in the 1980s on binoculars under the tent in the afternoon, and you couldn't see one slide I was showing because the tent had no slides to it. I remember saying to the audience, well, here's a picture of M31. Let's talk about what we can see in the sky, and say, maybe you want to use averted vision to see the slide because I'm not seeing anything either. And but I've given lots, including this year. I'm supposed to give one too, which is very nice.
And Richard, how many have you done?
I haven't kept track of them, maybe a dozen or 15, I don't know, but it's been an honor. You know, Stellafane has given so much to me. It's an honor to give back in some little way, and it's one of the highlights of the weekend to get up in front of the audience and do a presentation, and I enjoy doing it every year. And keep on doing it as long as I can.
And Dennis, you and Kim do the beginner presentations, and you've been doing that for a long time now.
Oh yeah, a long time, too long to even want to mention. But continuing on with that, Wayne, the programs that Richard does and the programs that Phil do, I like to think of them as family-friendly programs. You don't have to be an astrophotographer or an astrophysicist to go in and listen to those programs on Saturday afternoon under the tent. The whole family can enjoy it. Hey, Wayne, I do want to mention two things, if I may. We're talking about new technology. The Springfield telescope makers offers a mirror making class, and I believe this year we had 15 people making mirrors. And I just want the audience to know that if they go to the website, our new class will be starting. I'm not involved with that, but you don't have to be a member to take the class. So if there's anyone in the area that wants to make a good old telescope mirror, we have 5 or 6 experts that will guide you through that whole process. The other thing I didn't want to forget, Wayne, is this is our 100th year of the club. So there are many special events that are going to happen. If you were thinking about coming to Stellafane, this might be a real good year to come for the first time. We're even going to have people dressed up in period clothes and all kinds of special activities and special things for the 100th anniversary of the club.
It's not the 100th convention, but the 100th anniversary of the first one. And you're right, it's going to be a really big deal and a lot of fun. And you mentioned the mirror class, and you know, I remember when we started that back up in the 1990s, and it was me and a few other people. I was not the main person, but I was involved with it. But we had people, you know, we got people that were conventioneers or just people that were interested that came out and ended up joining the club and got more active. And we actually had somebody who was an attendee, came to the convention and would fly in from Texas once a month to go to the mirror class. And that person's now a member of the club and was an officer. So it really has an impact. It really has an impact. So I want to thank the three of you really from the bottom of my heart, because you're people that I care about and look up to, and appreciate all that you've done for the hobby and for Stellafane. And I think getting your input on this is really just, it means a lot. And just to share the love and the feelings that you have for the convention and for the grounds that are Stellafane are huge. So I want to thank you very much for spending the time today to do this.
Well, thank you for having us. It was a pleasure to talk about something that we love so much.
Yeah, it's an honor to be connected to Stellafane for so many years now, and to become part of the program is an honor that I could not have imagined during my first couple of conventions, and an honor that I don't take lightly. And likewise, Wayne, I think it's an honor that you asked me to be involved with this group discussion as well. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, that was an absolute blast, wasn't it? So remember, if you want information about Stellafane, go to their website, stellafane.org. And remember to go on Facebook, go to the Stellafane Memories group on Facebook. There's a lot of fun things there, a lot of great history, and a lot of great information about the convention, so please check it out. Well, that's all for this episode. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you found our time together to be fun and helpful. If you have questions or episode suggestions, please email us at astroguypodcast@gmail.com or leave us a text or a voicemail message at 973-404-0380. Please join the Astro Guy podcast group on Facebook. You'll find other members, videos, blogs, and lots of other useful information there for your enjoyment. You can also visit our YouTube channel, the Astro Guy Podcast, for past episodes and other surprises. Please subscribe. Please consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform. It helps us to get new listeners. Thank you again for listening, and may your skies be clear. As always, Carpe Noctem. Seize the night. I'm Wayne Zool, and this was the Astro Guy Podcast. Thank you for listening. As always, your questions, comments, and suggestions are welcome. Keep wondering. Keep your eyes on the sky. Have fun. Carpe Noctem. Seize the night.